To discover Cuba is to discover the world history of the last 5 centuries. Those ages that have passed since Christopher Columbus first made landfall on these then uncharted shores. Cuba is an island seemingly lost in some other age, remembered only for its part in political crisis, its reputation for producing the world's finest cigars, and more recently, for its music. Yet Cuba deserves more recognition than this. The magnificent colonial towns with their untouched Spanish architecture, cathedrals, exotic Cuban Baroque squares, and majestic fortresses. This is Cuba's story, from its ethnic origins to the coming of the revolution. Then there are the valleys of sugar and citrus plantations, the dense mangrove forest and swampland, the dry, flat savanna lands of the center, and finally, the Sierra Maestra dominating the far east. This is the mystical heartland of Cuba. This extraordinary landscape is home to an equally extraordinary people, whose unique brand of Caribbean socialism soldiers on, while communism has floundered in the rest of the world. How is it that Cuba's heart beats so loudly to the rhythms of freedom in the face of overwhelming oppression for so many centuries? What is it that makes up this raw and dynamic mix? It is the hot-blooded Spanish temperament that moves to the rhythms of the African heartlands, with feet planted firmly in the Indian Aboriginal dream time. To understand Cuba on the frontier of a new millennium, we must begin our story over 1,000 years ago, on these jungle-lined shores of the remote eastern corner of Cuba, in the town of Baracoa, cut off from the rest of the island by the massive Sierra Maestra range. It is here, in Baracoa, that the secret spirit of this island people was born. Here, the faces unmistakably recall those of the Yucatan Peninsula. These are the last of the Columbus Indians who've survived 500 years of racial mixing. A trace of those first Indian settlers survives in the name they gave to the island, Cuba. Cuba does not give up its archaeological secrets easily. However, there is evidence that the hunter-gatherer Juan Ayatabes settled in Cuba at least as early as 3500 BC. Later, the Cibones and the Taino made their homes here, in rock shelters and cave mouths like these. The name Cibone appears to be derived from the Arawak word Siba, meaning cave, and Eyeri, man. At one time, Cuba might have been home to some 500,000 Native Americans who arrived in waves from South and Central America and Venezuela's Orinoco Basin. But it was one illustrious European seafarer who first put Cuba on the world map. Christopher Columbus, believing that Asia could be reached by sailing westwards, eventually won support for his first transatlantic voyage from Queen Isabella. He made sail from Palos on the west coast of Spain on the 3rd of August, 1492. For 72 days, his 3 small ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and his flagship, the Santa Maria, headed relentlessly westward. Columbus had mistaken his landmark. Convinced that he'd discovered the southern mainland of the Indies, beyond which would be the spices, riches, and golden lands of the great Khan, he sent his men off in search of a king and great cities. Instead, they found only small villages of thatched huts and a people who fished from boats made by burning and carving large tree trunks. The natives smoked rolls of certain herbs, which they called cohibas. Here, in a church in Baracoa, is a cross, known as the Cruz de Barra, reputedly left behind by Columbus to mark the arrival of Christianity on these shores. But whatever its history, this Christian icon is preserved as a legacy of a people determined to make this island their own. Velázquez ordered the establishment of 7 garrison towns, or villas, along the island. The first was at Baracoa itself, functioning as the island's first capital. Santiago de Cuba, which succeeded Baracoa as the nation's capital in 1515, and Bayamo in the rebellious Cuban farmlands. Puerto Príncipe, now Camagüey, Batabano in the southwest, Sancti Spiritus in the rich agricultural heartland, and regal Trinidad on the southern Caribbean shores, which captures the atmosphere of those early years of Spanish colonization. Founded in 1514, it was an important trading port built on sugar and slaves. Baroque churches mixed with ornate colonial mansions built for the Spanish nobility. The doors and windows guarded by wooden rejas against the ever-present threat of marauding pirates. The streets paved with the cobblestone ballast from Spanish galleons. In 1515, after vanquishing the island's population, Velázquez hung up his sword and set up home in the new capital, Santiago. His stately mansion, which still stands in Céspedes Square, is the oldest building in Cuba. His remains were said to have been buried in the city's cathedral, although they've never been found. While the new Cubans strove to civilize the island, their countrymen continued to transport the riches of the Americas to the distant coffers of the Kingdom of Spain. The island was to acquire a strategic significance as the gateway to the New World. It was on the north coast that a large bay was found with a narrow rocky mouth surrounded by rolling hills. This would make the protected and deep harbor that the new city of San Cristobal de la Habana would need.